Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our reading through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 300. So for those of you who have been studying with us all the way, congratulations. Of course, we're a long way in the Johnson edition from poem 1775, but at least we're 300 poems in, and this one is called Morning Means Milking to the Farmer. And I love a poem like this because it displays the way in which Emily can start out so unbelievably simple and end so complex. Do you guys remember when we did Burns's To a Mouse, the best laid plans of mice and men soon off to go awry? I'm giving a translation of that dialect. But do you remember that we pointed out that often romantic poets love to do this, where they'll start out with something so simple and they end with a pretty complex observation? Emily's going to play the same game here. In some ways, we're back to poems 239 and 185 and poem 42, the celebration of morning. And in that regards, now our assumptions. I'm hopeful that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, I Play This. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments, and as well that you've read the preceding 299 poems. We just finished with 299, Your Riches Taught Me Poverty. Now, I want you to notice in this poem the movement from the obvious to the metaphorical. In some ways, when we hit poem 870, we'll play a very similar kind of game. I'll let you find that one and run that one to ground. This isn't really a poem about mourning as much as it is a poem about meaning. What is a morning? Well, the morning is the end of the night. But what does it actually mean to say, okay, morning has now come, night is now over? Like, what exactly does that mean, and what is involved in that? Well, it all depends on your perspective. Again, we're back to Plato's Republic and the idea from Republic 7 of perspicacity, as we've already said. Perspective, right? How you understand things, insight, if you will. Now, we have already said that Emily has a very interesting dance that she does with organized religion she grows up with and the question of faith. To what degree is she blessing the idea of faith and belief? To what degree is she challenging that? And of course it's Emily, so she can do both at the same time. This is the way she says it. Morning means milking to the farmer. Dawn to the tenerifer. Dice to the maid. Morning means just risk to the lover. Just revelation to the beloved. Epicures date a breakfast by it. Brides, an apocalypse. Worlds, a flood. Faint-going lives, their lapse from sighing. Faith, the experiment of our Lord. Now, I love that morning and milking are in quotation marks, because I think the point that she's making is we define different things by perspective. So for example, morning just for the farmer means, uh-oh, it's time to get up and I got to go to more work. In other words, morning you could argue is the end of sleep and rest, and it means the beginning of a new day. Dawn, just a reproduction of what we mean by dawning, to the Tenerife. Now, Tenerife is the largest of Spain's Canary Islands off the west coast of Africa. In other words, as the sun comes up, sunrise. In other words, dawn means sunrise, if you will. Dice to the maid. Now, dice is interesting. Takes us back to poem 139. Dice to the maid. Now, here by maid, it isn't completely clear what we're saying. Gambling, and are we talking about maid as in a virgin girl, or are we talking about somebody who works at a house? I'll leave it to you to figure out how you read that. Morning means, and see, we come back to it now again, just risk. Notice capitalized. The word just can mean what? Worthy. We're going to come to faith here in a little bit. Risk, and I think this is the key word. In 7 other poems she'll use this word risk. It's interesting to run into ground. To the lover, just revelation to the beloved. And notice it's kind of a repeating in some ways between lover and beloved, right? In other words, if we read this as the maid who gives up with her virginity in the night, in the morning she's got to wake up to whatever that means. And is it right? Is it just? And here Revelation, of course, brings with us the notion of apocalypse here in a little bit, which is another word for apocalypse. But then, interestingly, she goes to epicures. And guys, I've said this so many times, I think Emily is having a blast as she's playing the game of these poems. Again, in 1862, that year, she wrote at least 365 poems that we know of. And I think in all those poems, averaging one a day, right, in that year, I think she's having tremendous fun here. Epicures, of course, are individuals that enjoy life. Yes, they often are perceived as those individuals who overjoy life, although, to be fair, that's maybe a misreading of the original Epicurean philosophy. By the way, this is the only time Emily ever references epicures in this word in all of her poetry. Date a breakfast by it. In other words, morning comes and yay, I get to eat something again. Brides, we're back to maids possibly, we're back to lovers and beloved. Brides will see the morning as an apocalypse. Now, this, of course, after the wedding night, there is the morning that follows, and there are revelations that are a part of that. Again, we're back to that word revelation with apocalypse. Now, of course, apocalypse can also mean, by the way, she only uses this word apocalypse one time in all of her poetry, and it's here. Apocalypse can mean something that's maybe tragic, yes, okay? So in other words, a bride, she argues, might find herself saying the next morning, oh, so this is what we got all wound up about? Seriously? Could be that. And then she seems to be playing around with the ancient Noah story, worlds of flood. In other words, there was a morning there in the Genesis account when all of a sudden it starts raining, and then all of a sudden we've got a terrible flood. And then from there she goes to faint-going lives. In other words, people that are really fatigued might see mourning as their lapse from sighing. Why sighing? Because, of course, there's so much of the nighttime that was given to, bad feelings or whatever. By the way, think about the lapse from sighing, and think about our study of Dante and the Divine Comedy, and we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Think about in limbo, and then think about after limbo, those sighs that are a part of the individuals who couldn't make up their mind what to do, so they kind of walked in circles sighing. And I think Dante stands behind this poem in some regards, and then she'll go to faith. Now, we cannot read poem 300 and this use of faith without going back to poem 185. Faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. And you'll remember that we commented that we were very interested in her view of faith versus science. For all of a sudden now it's like, wait, are we talking about mourning again? She says, faith, the experiment of our Lord. And of course, experiment here takes us back to the dice of line 3. Well, what is the real question here? I think the question that she's making is it okay to take that leap of faith, as Kierkegaard will call it in his classic Fear and Trembling? And I think of 2a, the argument she's making here is that true faith requires a letting go. Why? Because we don't know how it's really going to turn out. And Emily, it seems in her poetry, is constantly struggling between faith and certainty, and which one is it that she is going to hold on to more closely. At 2b, I love again the movement from the obvious, well, yeah, obviously morning means it's time to get up and go milk the cows, to finally at the end of the poem, what does it mean to say that one is willing to engage in faith, the experiment of the Lord? At 3a, I mentioned Kierkegaard and I mentioned Dante. Finally, at 3b, I could have mentioned Pascal as well, right? And his wager, the Pascalian wager, as we sometimes have referenced it. Finally, at 3b, how do you understand this notion of faith or belief versus certainty or absolute? And to what degree is Emily challenging you to consider the values of both faith and certainty? Thank you.